My husband hit me at the dinner table in front of his entire family. No one moved. Then his mother leaned over and whispered 3 words that changed everything. His hand hit my face before I even registered it was moving. 1 second, I was laughing, genuinely, fully laughing, at something Daniel had said, the kind of involuntary laugh that catches you off guard. The next second, my head snapped sideways, earrings swinging, cheek burning, and the room went so completely silent that I could hear the candles. Every fork stopped in midair. Nobody moved. Not Daniel, who had been laughing with me half a second earlier. Not Richard's father, who cleared his throat once. Just once, like violence was a bad smell he was waiting to drift past. Not the cousins. Not anyone. Richard stood over me with his suit perfect and his wedding ring catching the candlelight and said, "You embarrassed me." I touched my cheek with my fingertips. No blood. He looked at my hand and something in his expression suggested this outcome was less satisfying than he'd anticipated. And then Evelyn Bennett, 70 years old, his mother, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with the particular stillness of a woman who has made a science of being still, leaned across toward me. Her hands were trembling slightly. Her eyes were full of something I can only describe as decades. "I stayed," she whispered. Her voice barely cleared the width of the table. "Don't become me." Richard's jaw tightened. "Mother," one word. She flinched. A reflex, not a choice. And I understood every single thing I needed to understand about this family in that one small flinch. I stood up. "I'll go wash my face," I said. Richard settled back slightly, satisfied. He thought submission sounded soft. Mine sounded like heels crossing marble floors, like a clock ticking down. I need to go back, because who Richard Bennett married was not who he thought he married, and the gap between those two things is where this entire story lives. My name is Clara Reyes. I had kept my name professionally, which Richard tolerated the way he tolerated all things he couldn't fully control, with tight-lipped patience and a long memory. Before I married Richard, I spent 8 years as a corporate compliance investigator for 2 multinational firms. My specific specialty was financial misconduct, the hidden kind, the kind dressed in clean language and routed through structures designed to confuse anyone who wasn't looking carefully. I was very good at it. I was good at it because I understood that the most dangerous people in any organization are the ones who have never been examined. Richard called my career boring paperwork. He said this often enough and lightly enough that it became part of the ambient sound of our marriage. One of those things a person says to reduce something they don't fully understand. I let him say it. I found it useful that he believed it. I met Richard at a charity auction 4 years before the dinner table. He was a corporate litigator with a reputation for winning cases that shouldn't have been winnable, which sounds admirable until you understand the specific methods, the pressure on witnesses, the creative framing of evidence, the way he used his firm's influence to make opposing counsel uncomfortable in ways that never quite crossed a legal line. I didn't know any of this at the auction. I knew a man in a well-cut suit who could hold a room's attention effortlessly, and who looked at me across a bidding paddle like I was the most interesting person in it. He was, for the first 6 months, the most attentive person I had ever known. He remembered everything. He showed up. He made me feel seen in a way that I later came to understand was not seeing, it was mapping. He was building a detailed model of what I needed so he could control the supply of it. We married at 14 months. It moved fast. Fast is another word for didn't have time to notice. The first year was adjustment. The second was the beginning of a very slow erosion I could feel but could not quite name. He corrected my opinions in front of other people. Not cruelly, just firmly, as though he were the primary source and I were a citation. He made decisions about our social calendar, our finances, our residence without discussing them, and when I raised it, the conversation somehow always ended with me feeling like I was the one being unreasonable. He questioned my memory of events. He questioned my reading of situations. He had a very specific talent for making me feel that my perception of reality was slightly off-center, which is a talent that, once you name it properly, makes your stomach drop. I named it properly in month 26, when I was driving home from my former colleague Mara Chen's birthday dinner. Mara, who had been my closest friend at the firm for 6 years, who was brilliant and incisive and completely unimpressed by Richard, and I replayed a conversation Richard and I had the previous week and understood, with sudden awful clarity, that my version of the conversation and his version of the conversation were so far apart that one of us was not remembering it accurately. I had been a compliance investigator. I knew how to test a hypothesis. I went home and I started documenting everything. Not for divorce. Not initially. I started documenting because documentation is what I know how to do when I am uncertain about a situation. A log of conversations. What was said, by whom, when, dates and times. A separate phone, a personal one, on a carrier Richard had no connection to. Notes backed up to a cloud account he didn't know existed. The camera above the wine cabinet in the dining room was installed in month 29. Under the guise of a home security upgrade I had managed entirely. Richard signed the consent form for the system without reading it closely, because Richard never read things closely that he considered beneath him. The form specified that all indoor cameras recorded continuously to a secure cloud storage account. His name was on the consent form. That mattered. By month 31, I had re-established regular contact with my attorney, Patricia Walsh, 14 years in family and civil law, a woman I had used once before for an unrelated matter, and who I trusted precisely because she had never once told me anything I wanted to hear, when the truth was more useful. I called her every 2 weeks from the separate phone. We did not discuss divorce. We discussed documentation, options, and the specific legal landscape of a situation involving a man with significant professional connections and the financial resources to make a legal conflict very expensive and very long. You're building a record, Patricia told me on one of those calls. Yes. How complete is it? Getting there, I said. When it's complete, she said, we move fast. Speed matters in these cases, especially when the other party has the kind of legal network Richard Bennett has. Mara Chen had become part of the preparation by month 32. She was now a senior compliance director at a financial oversight consultancy and had a professional relationship with Inspector Gabriel Reyes, a 17-year veteran of the Financial Crimes Division of the State Attorney's Office, who had, over the course of a long career, developed a specific interest in the financial structures used by prominent professional men to conceal assets from spouses during divorce proceedings. The Bennett Foundation, Richard's charitable vehicle, which was also, it had become increasingly clear from documents I had photographed during late nights in his office, a creative instrument for managing personal income and expenses, was of potential interest to Inspector Reyes's office. I had invited both Mara and Inspector Reyes to the charity gala 3 days before the dinner, before the hand, before the mark. I had already set everything in motion before Richard Bennett raised his hand at the table. The gala was the closing of a door I had been building the frame for over 2 years. What he did at dinner simply determined the door's final width. In the powder room, I locked the door and looked at myself in the mirror. The mark was red, spreading from cheekbone toward jaw. Not broken, not bleeding, just red, vivid, real. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about Evelyn at the far end of the table, her hands trembling, the weight of decades in her eyes. I thought about the word she'd used, stayed, the way she'd said it, not with regret exactly, but with the specific sorrow of a woman who had made a choice and lived long enough to understand its full cost. I opened my phone. The dining room recording had already uploaded. Automatic, continuous. Cloud stored under an account that had been active for 11 months. I pulled it up and I watched it. Watched myself laughing at Daniel's joke. Watched the hand. Watched my head snap sideways. Watched the room go still. Watched Evelyn lean across the table. I watched it once. That was enough. I called Patricia Walsh at 9:47 p.m. from the bathroom of my own home. It happened, I said. A pause. Short. Are you hurt? Not seriously, it's documented. From the camera? Cloud uploaded, time-stamped, continuous feed. He's on the home security consent form. Another pause. This one the sound of a professional recalibrating timeline. Then we move tomorrow, she said. I'll have emergency motions prepared by morning. Don't sleep in the bedroom tonight. Don't give him any reason to escalate. Understood. Clara, her voice was careful. You know this gets harder before it gets easier. I know, I said. I've been preparing for 2 years. I'm ready. I put on a small amount of makeup. I walked back to the table. I sat down. I picked up my fork. Nobody at that table said a single word about what had happened. I watched Richard accept compliments on the wine from his brother-in-law, and I felt something settle into place inside me that had been shifting for 32 months. Patience. Finished. The next morning, he rewrote it over coffee. This was the part I had documented most carefully, and for the longest, because it was the part that was hardest to prove and that did the most sustained damage. Not the escalating moments, but the aftermath. The careful, smooth, entirely confident rewriting of reality that followed every incident. You slipped, he said, sliding a cup across the island. It was awkward. Everyone was uncomfortable for you. I looked at him. I had half a glass of wine, I said. You've been emotional lately. He said it with concern. Genuine sounding concern, which was the most sophisticated part of the performance. I think you're not sleeping well. The stress of the gala planning. His hand rested on the counter near mine. The same hand. I looked at it. The charity gala is tonight, he said, his voice shifting into its management register. You'll attend. You'll smile. You'll remember that this family's reputation took 30 years to build. He leaned forward slightly. And you will never embarrass me in public again. Or what? I said. His eyes went cold. Not angry. Cold. The distinction was important, and I had learned it slowly. Anger was reactive. This was calculated. Or you'll find out what it feels like to walk away with nothing, he said. I've had Patricia O.C. review your prenuptial agreement. There are provisions you haven't read carefully enough. He smiled. Set his coffee cup in the sink. I'll see you at 7, he said. He left for the office. I sat at the island for 4 minutes. Then I texted Patricia Walsh. He made the morning threat. Documented. 7 p.m. tonight. We go. She replied within 90 seconds. Everything is ready. Mara and Reyes confirmed for 8:30. I'll have the emergency motions filed by noon. Protective order goes in simultaneously. I got up and started getting ready. Daniel arrived at 2 in the afternoon without knocking. Bennett men never knocked. Not in Richard's house. Not in anyone's house they believed was an extension of Richard's world. Daniel was 38, a corporate attorney like his brother, but without Richard's discipline, which made him sloppier and therefore, in some ways, more dangerous. He dropped a folder on my kitchen table without preamble. Post-nuptial revisions, he said. Richard asked me to walk you through them. I opened the folder without expression. It was dressed in clean legal language, but what it said, stripped of the architecture, was simple. If I left the marriage, I received nothing. If I spoke publicly about the marriage, I faced suit for defamation. If I made any allegations, the response would be a documented history of my emotional instability, which they had apparently been constructing, I noted, for at least 8 months, based on the dating of certain documents referenced in the footnotes. Signed by 5, Daniel said, before the gala. He smiled. The smile smile of a man who was extremely confident in his read of the situation. "You think you're the first woman to try this?" he said. "Richard handles things. He always has. Sign the papers and tonight stays simple." I looked at him. "Daniel," I said, "you just brought an intimidation contract to a former compliance director and investigator." Something moved across his face. A crack. Small. He recovered it quickly. "You haven't worked in years." "I haven't worked at a firm in years," I said. "I've been working from home." "Different thing." He picked up the folder. 5 o'clock, he said. He left. I called Mara. "He brought papers," I said. "I assumed he would. Does it change anything?" "No," I said. "It adds a coercion element. Patricia should know." Forwarding now. "Clara, are you all right?" I thought about it for a moment. Not the polite version of the question. The real one. "I will be," I said. "Tonight." At 5:30 p.m., I sat at my vanity with a full professional makeup kit and I covered the bruise completely. Foundation, concealer, setting powder. When I was finished, I looked entirely as I was expected to look. Composed, polished, the suitable wife of Richard Bennett. I wore the emerald silk because it was his favorite, and because walking into that ballroom in his favorite color, while carrying what I was carrying, felt, privately, like a small, specific satisfaction. The gala was the Bennett Foundation's annual fundraiser. 300 guests, donors and politicians and judges, and the kind of charitable community that exists partly to help causes and partly to be seen helping causes. Richard was the foundation's chair. The evening was his theater. He guided me through the room with a hand at the small of my back that was technically affectionate and functionally possessive. I smiled at the right people. I said the right things. I had been doing this for 4 years, and I was fluent in it. At 8:22 p.m., I saw Mara Chen near the bar. She was speaking to a man in a dark suit with the specific bearing of someone accustomed to rooms full of people with things to hide. Inspector Gabriel Reyes, 17 years in financial crimes. We had worked adjacent to each other once, years ago, on a compliance matter that overlapped with one of his investigations. He had a reputation for thoroughness that people in financial misconduct found quietly terrifying. I had invited them both 4 days ago. Richard followed my gaze. "Friends of yours?" he asked, low, his public voice perfectly maintained for the people around us. "Yes," I said, smiling for a passing photographer. "That's exactly why they're here." He went still for a fraction of a second. "Just one." I excused myself. 9:17 p.m. Mara filed 3 emergency motions through Patricia Walsh's office. Asset freeze on the Bennett Foundation accounts, discovery order on Richard's personal financial records, and a motion in support of the protective order Patricia had filed at noon. All of it coordinated, all of it timed. 9:23 p.m. The sealed evidence package, 2 years of documentation, the cloud recordings, the compliance analysis Mara's firm had prepared on the Bennett Foundation's financial structure, and Patricia's affidavit reached the state attorney's office. 9:31 p.m. The Bennett Foundation's primary operating accounts were frozen pending investigation. 9:40 p.m. Daniel's phone buzzed somewhere across the ballroom. I watched the color leave his face from 20 feet away. He looked at me. I lifted my champagne glass toward him, just slightly. He looked away first. Richard found me on the balcony at 9:52 p.m. He had lost the public voice entirely. What came out now was unprocessed, tight, compressed, the sound of a man whose operating system was failing in real time. "What did you do?" he said. "I listened," I said. "To what?" His voice cracked on the second word. "To your mother," I said. "To your accountant who reached out to Patricia Walsh's office 6 weeks ago. To the assistant, Daniel cornered in an elevator and pressured into silence. She has had an attorney for 3 months. And to myself, Richard. I've been listening to myself for a very long time." His face had gone the particular white of someone who is calculating and coming up with nothing. I held up my phone, pressed play, the dining room, the sound of conversation, of cutlery, my laugh, then the sound that didn't need any context, sharp, sudden, unmistakable, the silence that followed it, Evelyn's voice, barely audible but clear. I stayed. "Don't become me." Richard's hand on my shoulder like a deed of ownership. He lunged. His hand reached for the phone. The balcony doors opened behind him. Mara entered first, then Inspector Reyes, then 2 officers in plain clothes who had been inside the building for 40 minutes at Inspector Reyes's direction. The music from the ballroom dimmed, heads turned. The specific quality of attention that moves through a crowd when something real is happening, not performed, not curated, spread from table to table. "Richard Bennett," Inspector Reyes said. He had a warrant document in his hand and the calm of a man who has done this many times and finds it neither dramatic nor casual, simply necessary. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of domestic assault and a preliminary warrant related to a financial crimes investigation currently in process. You'll need to come with us." "You can't use private recordings," Richard said immediately. His lawyer brain was still running, just barely. "Any evidence from— You signed the home security consent form yourself," Mara said. She said it pleasantly. 2 years ago. It's on file." Richard looked at me. For the first time in our marriage, possibly for the first time in his life, he looked at me without the filter of what he needed me to be. Just looked. Clara has nothing further to say to you," Patricia Walsh said, stepping onto the balcony in a charcoal jacket. She had been inside the building since 9 o'clock. "Her communications go through me." Richard made one last move. It was the move I had anticipated most, because it was the most Richard of all possible moves. The public pivot, the reframe, the one gambit left when the legal architecture is collapsing. He stepped slightly away from the officers, toward the open balcony doors where the ballroom was visible, raised his voice. "My wife has been emotionally unstable unstable for months, he announced, loud enough to reach every table within range, loud enough for the cameras. This is a fabrication by a woman who couldn't manage the responsibilities of this family. I had prepared for this. I walked past him, into the ballroom, to the center of it. Every camera in that room, the event photographer, the journalists who covered the foundation's annual fundraiser, the phones of 300 guests, was on me. I opened my evening bag. I took out a makeup removal cloth. I pressed it to my cheek and drew it slowly, completely across my face. The foundation came away. The bruise stayed, purple and spreading and entirely real. A woman near the front made a sound that wasn't a word. Then the room went absolutely, completely silent. The kind of silence that is not empty but full, packed with the weight of 300 people understanding simultaneously what they were looking at. Every camera captured it. I lowered my hand. Then Evelyn Bennett's voice cut through the silence from somewhere near the back of the room. He hit me too. She had followed us in from the corridor. 70 years old, in the navy dress she'd worn to every family event for the past decade, standing in the entrance of the ballroom with her chin slightly raised for the first time I had ever seen it. He hit me too, she said again, and her voice was stronger the second time, the way voices get stronger when they've been compressed for a very long time and are finally allowed to expand. For 38 years he hit me, she said, and I stayed. She looked at me. Not anymore. Richard turned toward her. Don't. The handcuff clicked onto his right wrist, then his left. The sound was small and entirely final. The ballroom did not erupt. It did not break into noise or chaos or the kind of dramatic response that happens in films. What happened was stranger and more real. A long, suspended moment in which 300 people stood completely still, not looking at Richard Bennett being escorted out by 2 officers, but at his mother, Evelyn Bennett, 70 years old, standing straight in the entrance of a room that had celebrated her husband and her son and their family's carefully constructed legacy for 38 years. Standing straight, finally, for what might have been the first time in any of those years. Some of them would later tell journalists they couldn't look away from her. I couldn't either. Patricia Walsh appeared at my shoulder. Protective order is active. His access to the house is terminated. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps, but tonight you go wherever you want and you don't go home. I know, I said. The financial crimes investigation will be separate from the criminal case. Reyes says they have enough from the Bennett Foundation records to open a full inquiry. I know, I said again. She looked at me for a moment. You planned most of this before he hit you. Yes. Why didn't you move earlier? I thought about it. The honest answer. Because planning isn't the same as ready, I said. And I wasn't ready until Evelyn told me not to stay. Patricia nodded slowly, said nothing else. I found Evelyn near the edge of the room, in the general drift of confused guests, who were not quite sure whether to stay or leave. She was standing still in the way she always stood still, out of habit, out of practice. But something about her posture was different, fractionally different. Enough. I stood next to her without saying anything for a moment. You came, I said finally. You put the camera where I could see it, she said. In the dining room. I saw the light once after you'd gone upstairs. I looked at it for a long time. I looked at her. Did you know what it was? I asked. I hoped, she said simply. I took her hand. She let me. Patricia has a colleague who works with survivors, I said. When you're ready. No pressure on the timeline. Evelyn looked out over the emptying ballroom, the abandoned champagne glasses, the overturned program cards, the gala that had been planned for 300 guests and had become something else entirely. 38 years, she said quietly. Not to me. To herself, maybe. Or to the room. Or to all the versions of herself that had sat at long dinner tables and kept the stillness and not said the thing that needed saying. The first time I stayed, she said, I told myself it was one incident. The second time, I told myself it was the last. By the 10th time, I had stopped counting and started managing. She looked at me. Don't manage, she said. I spent 38 years managing, and I have nothing to show for it except tonight. Tonight is something, I said. She considered that. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. The criminal case moved through arraignment within 48 hours of the arrest. Richard was charged with domestic assault, witness intimidation. The assistant Daniel had pressured had agreed to provide testimony, and as the financial crimes investigation developed, 2 additional charges related to fraudulent use of the Bennett Foundation's nonprofit designation. Daniel was named as a material witness and subsequently charged with coercion related to the postnuptial papers and his role in pressuring the assistant. Patricia Walsh had been right. It got harder before it got easier. There were weeks of legal proceedings and media attention, and the specific, uncomfortable exposure of a private life dragged into public record. There were people in Richard's circle who said what Richard's circle always says, that I had orchestrated it, that I was calculating, that no woman of genuine victim status would have been that prepared. I took those comments as the highest possible compliment. The divorce was finalized 11 months later. The Bennett Foundation was dissolved by the state attorney's office following the completion of the financial crimes investigation, which found, among other things, that approximately $340,000 in charitable donations had been routed to cover personal and legal expenses over a period of 6 years. Richard's law firm terminated his partnership during the criminal proceedings. He was convicted on the domestic assault charge and received a sentence that his attorney spent 3 months arguing down from what the prosecution had requested, which still resulted in 2 years of probation, mandatory intervention programming, and a permanent restraining order. He lost the house. He lost the reputation. He lost the name. That part mattered to him most, I think. blank. The Bennett name that had opened every door, that had bought every advantage, that had made 30 years of behavior possible because no one with access to it had ever looked at the man holding it carefully enough. Evelyn sold the family home in February and moved to a smaller property near her sister. She sent me a photograph of the kitchen, bright, south-facing, full of afternoon light. "Nothing to manage here," she wrote under it. "Just mine." I kept that photograph. I keep it because it says the thing I'm still learning to say about my own life, the quiet one I'm building now, without performance, without management, without the constant low-grade vigilance of a woman who has been mapping the perimeter of someone else's damage for so long she'd forgotten what an unmapped room felt like. My cheek healed. The bruise took 3 weeks to fade completely. I documented every stage of it because Patricia asked me to, and because documentation is still and will always be my first instinct when faced with something that needs to be remembered accurately. When it was finally gone, I looked at my face in the mirror for a long time. Just my face. Mine. Unmanaged. Entirely. Quietly. Completely mine.